Well, today we're going to make a tote bag in the AQS Let's Quilt Beginner Series. This is our foundation paper piecing class. And you know, when we decided we were going to do this program, I said, you know, I really want to make a tote bag, one that just anybody that knows how to sew with a sewing machine could make. And so I've made it as simple as I can, so I hope that you'll find it easy to put together. But Meredith Schrader said to me, Bonnie, why don't you make a big bag so you could carry a quilt in it? So I sized this up a little bit, and I think you could probably carry 2 or 3 quilts in it. It would be perfect to take your supplies to your next quilting retreat. Can't wait to have those either, can we? Or it's summertime, so you could load up your stuff and head to the beach. So I'm going to first of all talk about the products that we're going to use for this class. We have a piece of black batik is what I used for the base of the bag, and the lining is a piece of fabric that was 108-inch wide backing fabric, but I only had less than a yard of it, and boy, it worked out just perfectly for this particular bag. So the batik fabric and the jelly roll is from 9 Patch Fabrics. And I really would encourage you to go check out their website because they have a lot of jelly rolls and they also have a great line of batik fabrics. And they carry 180-inch wide backing fabrics as well. So I chose this one. It's a Moda jelly roll, and it is one of the jelly rolls that was designed by Elizabeth Hartman. And I chose it because it had a lot of the colors that are in the lining piece of my bag. And you'll notice that today I'm working on a different color scheme. Well, it takes not quite 2 strips of the jelly roll of each color. And so that meant I had enough to make 2 blocks in one color scheme. So when I got ready to do the blocks for the show, I needed to pick some different colors. So you can see that I had red in the other one and lime green, so I changed it up a little bit. So you should have cut your fabrics now if you're ready to start sewing with me. I've cut the 20 by 34-inch piece for the outer part of the bag and a piece to line the pocket in that same fabric. And then for the lining, which is my print, I have cut a 20 by 34 for the lining and also a piece that's 16 by 20 for the inside pocket. So we'll have 2 pockets on the outside and 3 pockets on the inside. Out of the lining fabric, I cut the strips, 2 strips for the handles, and you can certainly make those any color. If you wanted to use one of the colors in the jelly roll, you could do that as well. You just have to sew those pieces together. All right, so now I've cut some more pieces here. We're going to need a big black center, and I made mine the same as the bag color. But you know what? This is a piece that you could embroider somebody's initial on. You could use a fussy cut print of some kind. This could be anything. I just chose to do it so that it went with the bag. And now I'm using yellow, green, blue, and purple, and these are strips right out of the jelly roll. Okay, so then we're also going to need our rotary cutter, our roller, this is our seam roller, a dot of glue, I used the glue stick in that center square, and a marking pencil. And of course, the thing that makes all of this happen is the add a quarter ruler. Now, if you join me for making the foundation paper pieced pillow, you'll know that you have a handout that you can print out. And so this is lesson 3. And one of the things that you're going to see in lesson 3 is 2 thumbnails. We're going to sew 2 different blocks, and I'm going to show you those blocks and explain that in just a minute. But if you'll click on block A and print it, and then block B and print it, you just need one of each of those blocks to be able to make the tote bag pocket. Now I will warn you, because this is an 8-inch block, we didn't have room to add the seam allowance on. So when you cut this out, you want to make sure you leave that seam allowance on the top and bottom of the block. Just as a reminder from the last class, you can print these on several different kinds of paper, and I have done that. I printed it on the Carol Doak foundation paper. I printed it on regular copy paper. And here are the two that I printed on the vellum paper. And so you can see when I trimmed this, I actually left at the top and bottom that 1/4 of an inch. This block I've already made, so I don't need to do anything with that one right now, but you will need to make 2 blocks. So before we start sewing, we're going to have just a short word from our sponsors, and when we get back, we're going to start sewing the Tote Bags Foundation Paper Piece Block.
9 Patch Fabrics has a wide variety of fabric, patterns, and notions. We offer quilt store quality fabric from manufacturers such as Moda, Robert Kaufman, Island Batik, and more. 9 Patch Fabrics also features a variety of notions, including creative grids, rulers, sew line marking tools, and more. Visit 9 Patch Fabrics at 9patchfabrics.com.
Tracy's Tables has all of your custom sewing table needs. Visit tracystables.com to see the complete line of unique tables, carts, and shelves. And all of Tracy's Tables are made in the USA.
All right, so I'm ready to sew, and so the first piece that we put on is piece number 1. Piece number 1 is always placed on the back of the pattern with the wrong side to the pattern. So this is right side up, okay? And you can see why I like this vellum, because you can see that I can check and make sure my seam allowance is covered all the way around. And I did just take my glue stick and add just a dot of glue, mostly because this is a pretty big piece and you don't want to have a bunch of pins in the center, okay? I want to tell you too that this block is the twisted log cabin, and if some of you are familiar with watching Simply Quilts, I actually showed how to do this twisted log cabin block on Simply Quilts quite a few years ago, but it's always a popular pattern. Okay, so you can see that we have the center square, and then we're making another twisted square right around that one in each of these colors. One of the things that's real easy to do is, after you're sewing a couple of the pieces on, to forget what piece comes next. So I want to show you what I did to my pattern. I marked Y for yellow in all of those 4 spaces, and then a G for green, a blue, and purple. And another thing I've done on this, sometimes if you have a lot more colors, I've actually used colored pencils and just did a little scribble of each of those colors in the blocks. And that way, as you're getting ready to sew it and you look down and it says green and you've got a blue piece in your hand, you know we've got to fix that right there before you start sewing. Okay, so we're going to set, this is piece number 1, and so piece number 2. And you remember that we're going to crease our paper. All right, so now after you crease that paper, we're always going to, if you just remember, you folded this back, the next thing you need to do is go ahead and use this ruler and trim this seam allowance down to 1/4 of an inch. And we're going to do that every single time. So you just need to remember, after we crease the paper, fold it back, and then just while you have it in your hand, and that way, and that's sort of what that guide is that I gave you in lesson 1, so that you could keep it right here just to refresh your memory if you needed to. All right, so now I'm ready to sew piece number 2, and piece number 2 is yellow. So now it's just a reminder from doing the piecing, you don't want to skimp. Here's where my thumb is right there where it needs to start. And so I'm going to give myself a nail, fingernail width on the end. I'm going to lay it down, fold the paper out, put 1 pin in just to hold those layers together. Now when I get it to the machine, you'll notice I almost always do come back and just double check to make sure I can see both colors of the fabric right there before I start sewing. And we're going to put our needle down just one stitch before line number 2. Okay. I'll stop one stitch after and cut my thread. Okay, so now while you're right here, my scissors are laying right here, I can see that, okay, it only needs to be this long, so I'm just going to flip my pattern up and I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut right straight across that piece of fabric. All right, so that was number 2. We'll take the pin out. We're going to open it up and press with our wallpaper roller. I actually think this one's an art roller, but it could be a wallpaper roller if you have one. All right, so now I'm going to pin that out of the way so it doesn't flop anywhere. And turn my pattern over, and piece number 3 again is yellow. So we will fold our paper. Now I do want to show you something right there. I maybe went one stitch too far, and you can see how it pulls the fabric up right there. You really need to release that stitch from the paper. That's why you don't want to go several stitches past, because you'll end up having to rip those stitches out of the paper. All right, so I have this in my hand. All right. While we've got it right here, we're going to trim off these excess seam allowances. Oops. And now we're ready to add another piece of yellow. Remember, I did check that. It's yellow. And so here's the end of the line right here. And again, I'm just going to drop that in between my fingers. Line up those edges. Pin the strips. While I'm right here, I'm just going to lift this up and trim off my tail. If you haven't ever used this ruler, you can see that there's a lip that's 1/4 of an inch wide here on this edge. And so I'm always lining that up right on the edge of my pattern. Now you will notice that on this block, I find that it's real easy to get one of these pieces flipped over. So I pin those down, and then you'll remove those pins as you go along. Okay, so we just did piece number 5, which was yellow. All right, so now piece number 6 is green. So I'll pick up a green strip. Okay, I'm going to continue sewing this green round, and we have just a brief message from some of our sponsors. One of the things that right at this point that I always do, and that is I'm running my finger over here to make sure that I'm on the right line. Sometimes it's real easy to get off, so I want to be able to feel these stitches right here before I sew this seam. So I'm just going to keep sewing round and round and round in these different colors, but you keep going. It'll take me a lot less time because we can speed this all up. Okay, the block is all finished. Now, I promised you that I would tell you what you would do if you end up cutting a piece too short. So let's just say that I cut this off too short right here. What I would do is I would pull back, I don't know, maybe an inch or inch and a half, and sew another piece of the purple fabric to it, and then put it down so that it would, so you'd have a piece that would be sewn like this, and open the seam allowance, and then just lay it in here and just restitch it. In the whole scheme of, by the time you put a little quilting, sometimes you might do some decorative stitches on some of these seams, you will not see that one little bobble that you make, and it's a whole lot easier than ripping out a whole piece. And these are about 6 or 7 inches long. Sometimes they may be longer than that, and you wouldn't want to necessarily pull them out. So don't be afraid to just go in and fix it. You know what? We're working with fabric, and it's malleable, and we can do about anything we want with it. So all right, so now we're ready to press this. I'm going to get my iron heated up, and we're going to have a short word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
The secret to every great project is great lighting. You can have beautiful fabric, the best threads, but if you can't see what you are sewing, we all know what will happen. Vivilux lights and lasers are the only lights made by quilters for quilters. Look for Vivilux lights and lasers at your favorite independent sewing and quilt shop or online.
Okay, so now we're ready to iron. And again, you're just going to let the heat of the iron do the work. We don't have to do very much work with this. I just want to get it pressed good and flat so we can do the trimming. Okay, so we're going to make sure from the solid edge that we're trimming this 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so now we have both blocks finished, and so the next step that I'm going to do is pin the blocks together. Now there is one point that you have to make sure you pay attention to, and that is right here. So you want to use a positioning pin right where, because this seam allowance will disappear so that these will join up properly. So we're going to do that right now. I'll get me a few pins here. I'm going to start with that one and put my pin in right there and go into this one right there. Okay, so now that's a positioning pin. So all it's doing is bringing my 2 layers of fabric together. So now I'm going to take some more pins, and I'm going to put another pin on one side and a second pin on the other side, because I'm going to take that positioning pin out of there. Okay, so this pin comes out. I'll pin my corners. And I'm going to going to put one right here in the middle. Okay, so we're ready to sew that with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Remember, we don't sew over our pins. I'll pull those out as I go. Okay, so now I want to show you exactly what I was talking about, where this really needs to come together right there. And by using the positioning pin, we were able to do that. All right, so the next step is going to be tearing the paper off of this other block. And once we've done that, we're going to take our lining fabric. Oh, actually, there's one more step. These blocks are only 8 inches, and that means that we have to add on a strip of our bag fabric on each side of this so that this will be 20 inches, which is the width of our bag. So before we can do anything with the lining, we need to sew these 2 pieces on, and then we're all ready for the lining. Okay, we'll give this a quick press. I'm going to fold this fabric in half, just so I can make sure I get the center of it right there in the middle of the seam. I'm going to pin this lining to both the top and the bottom. And for right now, we're just going to sew the top and the bottom so that we can turn it right side out, and then we will stitch it on the bag as we assemble it. And you'll notice I left that paper in there. I left it in there because I can do that after this is all sewn together before I turn it right side out. So this will get us all ready for our assembly of the tote bag for our next lesson. Okay, so all we have to do now before we get to our next lesson is remove the paper from this, turn our pockets inside out, and you'll be able to do that because we left the ends open, and flip it right side out. And next time we will be sewing our tote bag together. Now don't forget, go register for these great prizes that our sponsors are providing for you. We have Tracy's Tables in Wonderfill thread and 9-patch fabrics and Panasonic irons and Vivalux lights. So there's lots of things for you to win. Be sure you go to register at quiltweek.com/letsquilt and just scroll down until you find the register button. And if you're not already an AQS member, We'd sure love to have you join us. We are the largest quilting membership organization in the world. And with our sponsors, we'll be able to give you these wonderful prizes at no cost at quiltweek.com. And that's where you'll find all of the classes that we're doing in this AQS Let's Quilt series. So with that, I'll finish up mine, and when we get back together next time, we're going to assemble our bag.